I want to welcome everybody to our today's HEAS seminar talk. Our speaker Thomas Stöllner is already online. I just want to give you some short words about his scientific career, or what he has done until now, so you get an impression of his huge work. Thomas has studied at the University Salzburg, Marburg, Regensburg in Vienna. He has started with pre- and proto-history, anthropology, Christian archaeology, and also geology. In 1995, he did his promotion, and in 2003, he did his habilitation in prehistory at the University Marburg with studies to prehistoric salt industries in Central Europe. So, and this is already gives us the way, or shows the way where his research is going. He did many research projects on mining archaeology, and this is also caused by the fact, or initiated by his career. In the year 2000, he became head of the Department of Mining Archaeology at the Deutsches Bergbaumuseum Bochum. And in 2014, he became head of research at the Deutsches Bergbaumuseum Bochum as member of the directory. In all these years in between, he did some research, visiting research. He was visiting research fellow in Australia at the University of Adelaide. But as you will see, this is just a very short, very small summarize. If you Google Thomas Stöllner, you will see he's a very active person. He did, for example, research at the Dürnberg at Hallein. He initiated a project on the Mitterberg Bronze Age mining in Salzburg. He did research, or he initiated projects on gold in Georgia, as well as copper mining in Iran, but not only copper mining, as we will hear today, also on the salt mining. He's very active in teaching students. He got together with the, or under the umbrella of the Leibniz company. He did various how do you call it, graduate schools on raw materials, innovation, technology, and ancient culture. This is just one of them. And so he's also very active in student teaching, student education, and bringing forward our science. But as I had said, if you would Google him, this is just a very short overview. He did also projects in Kazakhstan, in Peru, in Hungary, in Germany, and Slovakia. So there's a really big oeuvre, we can already say now, of Thomas Stöllner. And today he will give us a very short, or not short, sorry, he will give us an insight into mining archaeology, which is also a good, how to say it, on Friday I gave a short talk just on metallurgy, but I was also hitting the problems when you do mining. And I think today with this lecture we will get a very good insight, a very good impression how mining in prehistory work, and also in that case can say not work, and that people occur. And now I want to give the word to Thomas. Thomas, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matthias. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad. Unfortunately, I was not able to come to Vienna, which I always like to. Such a nice city, all these nice places to meet the colleagues. But now you only have me as from the conserve, so to say, virtually. But I hope I can a little bit balance it out by a good lecture and giving you an insight into a project that we are doing now since quite a couple of years. And let me stress at the beginning, doing complex research projects together with colleagues is a demandful job, and it takes years to come to certain points. As you all know, archaeology is not a single-headed discipline. It has always to involve many other side disciplines being collaborating with. But you will see with this project that deals with death in the salt. It's also a title of an exhibition we did in Bochum some years ago, but which was centered around an antique, or several antique mining catastrophes on the mine of Duslach. But as I also indicate by the title, I will also talk about the economy being somehow related, these societies, communities somehow related with these mining. And this gives us also an interesting aspect on the, let's say, rural parts of the Persian Empire. As you will learn, this mining has nothing to do with the earlier periods, which we have in Hallstatt, for instance, or at the Dürnberg. It's more or less the Achaemenid and the following periods, the classical periods, so to say, of the Iranian or Persian Empire or empires. Okay, let's start with, of course, I cannot resist a little bit to talk about man and the salt in Austria, as this is something we are also very well, we do know very well about. It's, or not so well, but it's about these stories about finding ancient miners in the Dürnberg in the 16th and 17th century, and in the 18th century in Hallstatt. Famous stories that brought around us the well-preservation, the well-preserved status of these mining bodies, but also about the situation of catastrophes. And already the Tücker Chronicle from the 15th, 16th century told about that these men had been, should be a casualty of a prehistoric or before the mentioned, so to say, mining catastrophe. As he wrote here, zuweilen im Salz, also ohne Faulung, eben Pickel, Schuhkleider, hülserne Pickel im ganzen Stein verwachsen gefunden werden. Also found things founding around. So the miners, in this case, were the first to really recognize the situation of the, so to say, Heidengebirge, as we call it nowadays, where things are embedded and well preserved. So something that is the most rewarding thing for us as a bioarchaeologists or archaeologists at all, to give us this preservation status as a way to access to prehistoric or historical communities in a way what we normally not find in other fine circumstances. Of course, it had been worked and also in the literature, and we find, for instance, the nice book of Ganghofer about the Mann im Salz, but nothing to do, of course, with the Dürnberg, although the story was induced by the findings from the Dürnberg, but then retransported or transferred to the mine of Berchtesgaden, which is historical, of course, not correct. However, when we talk about sodium chloride, about the so-called Kochsalz, of course, we understand if we deal with salt archaeology, that salt archaeology is nothing, is not a phenomenon that you can only relate to one cultural setting. It's something you find worldwide, and also the techniques being involved, you find similar things worldwide, from the brine use to the rock salt use, but also using liquids, salt enrichments in soils. Humans were very creative, are very creative to use all kinds of salt concentrations, sodium chloride concentrations worldwide to meet their daily demand. And the demand of salt is, as you know, very, very basic. Of course, you need it for your physiology. You need about 5 to 7, 10 grams a day as a human being, but you need also for your husbandry system, for your cattle, for instance, for sheep. You need it for conservation. You need it, of course, for metallurgy, for also for medicine, and many other more things that are related to the salt. Also, as a currency, salt had been used. So this is a story that links the archaeologies and cultural history worldwide with one basic element. It's a mineral that you can eat. This is the very special thing with the salt, I would say. And this, of course, is interesting. And you can look around where you find ancient salt mines, rock salt mines, so to say, and they depart from Hallstatt and Dürnberg in the Austrian Alps. You find them in Romania, you find them in the Caucasus and also in Iran. You find them at the Montaña del Sal, but you find them also in Arizona and Nevada. So you find them worldwide, and I'm sure you find them also on other fine spots if archaeology is somehow involved. And what is interesting in all that areas, you also find casualties. You find situation that when mine collapsed and also buried their miners under them, under their rocks. And this, of course, is also a big opportunity for us to make research. As I said, Hallstatt Hallein, the Camp Verde salt mining and the St. Thomas salt mining, the Dustoi, where we have the reports, of course, the Cherabad mine we're talking today about, and showing us these special conditions and what you can learn from these casualties in special, but also in regard of, so to say, the whole economy and the circumstances. And if you look to Iran, of course, talking about salt archaeology in Iran always means you have to deal with many more properties of salt. So we have, of course, in the literature since Seljuk period, we have the qualification of salt in a black or white salt. Most of the case, it has to do with the evaporations that you have in the Kavirs in the central part of Iran, in the so-called Central Plateau, where you find these outcrops. This is freely being used by the populations and had been qualified for trading conditions as the so-called Namaki Siyah and Namaki Sefid. But of course, you have also rock salt. And when you look at the salt deposits at the Central Plateau in Iran in general, you would say Duslach as a rock salt deposit is very special. We have not so many of those, and in a short while you will understand why it's so special, because the rock salt is rich, is very pure, and of course well tasting. And this is possibly one of the reasons why they took the effort to do the mining there. A bit on the landscape, you see nowadays it's a typical Central Plateau landscape in the province of Zanjan. You see the valley filling, you will come to it later on, is quite high. So we have high erosion rates since the early Holocene, which of course have altered the whole landscape considerably. And within this landscape, we have one salt dome. It's called Duslach, which means, it's in Azeri language, means area of salt, and where you could access to the sodium chloride. Of course, you have all other saline rocks in the surrounding, like gypsum and other things that you could use, but for consumption, so to say, the sodium chloride from the Duslach is well tasting, as I told you. And here it was because of the salt extraction on a very small scale level, a regional salt extraction that in winter 93 to 4, people found the first remnants of an ancient salt mine, especially the head you see here, the famous head that is now housed in the National Museum in Tehran, a Parthian to Sasanian salt miner. And those days it was not quite clear. Of course, there were no archaeologists on site, and later on also the rescue excavation did not really understand the whole mining situation. Of course, there was no mining archaeologist on the spot, and mining archaeology those days in Iran was not very well known. So there was no clear, let's say, featuring of the situation those days. However, after they have found the awareness of these finds raised, and but it took another nearly 10 years until a young archaeologist, his name was Abul Faz Ali, and his colleague, Mr. Rahmati, and others came to the site. A new salt mine was discovered. It was salt mine number 2, which you see here, some parts of it that were found, and this led to the first rescue, enduring rescue excavations in 2004 and 5, during which other mining remnants, especially salt bodies have been found, the number 3, the number 4, and number 5, of whom you see some of the pictures here on my slide. And of course, this was the point when I came the first time to Cherabad. I was during the copper mine excavations in Veshnave. We traveled, we met, and we discussed the first time a collaboration that could then take place some years later on in an integrated research project, of which I will tell you now. It became granted by the German Research Foundation and other foundations in 2009, and then nearly afterwards we started with now an enduring and long time project. You do see What we also involve is many other bioarchaeologies, geoarchaeology, of course, archaeometry, archaeobotany, all these things which are necessary to understand the rich heritage of this site. And of course, many persons. And you see here on the area, this is Abul Fas, younger in time, those days, like me, and now we aged during this long-term collaboration, but by the time got also wonderful results from our study. And this study involves, of course, the research on the site. You see the Duslach mine here in the background. It's on the salt mining, the salt mummies, the technique, the supply, trade, living and death of salt miners, landscape, ecology, all these things which seem to be important for this, but also involves, by help of the Gerda Henkel Stiftung, also restoration and preservation of the site, the exhibition in Sanjan Museum, the preservation of the mining heritage. And of course, what was also one of the goals of our project is to establish a water supply and employment for the local population, especially of a village. It's called Hampselu here on the Piedmont, on the salt mine. And we hope, although we have the turmoils now in Iran and all the problems, we can continue the work there also to establish a site museum, a site museum to make it a visible or let's say a site for tourism, in order to protect the site, because of course you can imagine also such sites are not protected if nobody is there in these kind of landscapes. And you see the whole range of institutions being involved. From Vienna, especially I have to mention the Natural History Museum, of course the Prehistoric Department, Karina Krömer, and also other colleagues from Vienna also involved in the study of fabrics, textiles, furs, the Austrian Academy, and many more colleagues from the salt study research in Austria are involved. However, coming back to the salt mountain, to the salt dome, it's in fact not a deep pier, as you would say from the geology. It's more a slate that had been driven or slided downwards the river valley and then pressed upwards. And you can a little bit understand the geological situation. The purple ones, so in between, these are rich and massive rock salt layers, which are the desirable point for exploiting the deposit. You see it here in this a little bit. Here where we have the ancient mining, of course it's exploited, but it's a several meter massive, one of these several meter massive embeddings of rock salt, of very pure rock salt that had been exploited by several phases of ancient mining, of which I will talk a bit later. You can imagine the mountain originally may have been much higher as it is nowadays. So our research and fieldwork started, as I told, 2009, 2010. And of course, we did a lot of things in the mine, of course, with the artifacts. We did survey in the hydrological catchment areas around. We did a lot of work on the logistic and the subsistence of the mining by help of all kinds of archaeobiology studies. So we get now a good idea on the whole thing in general, which I will now talk about. And of course, the mining itself is demandful because partly you have to use heavy machinery, for instance, here to dig out old modern mining traces to come to the ancient mining, or to do drilling by heavy gear in the surrounding. This, of course, is not always easy in Iran to get such drilling equipment on to the spot. But as you possibly know, in Iran, many things are possible if you are connected rightly to the colleagues and to the communities. However, some words on the field results. Of course, we did several campaigns in the mine. It's not so easy, but there is a favorable situation. You can excavate the mine from the upper part to the lower part. It's not normal if you go to a salt mine like Austria. You have not this chance, but here the covering layers had been removed by the bulldozing of the modern mine. So we were able to really excavate, as you do normally in archaeology, in normal stratigraphical layers. So this gave us the opportunity really to differentiate in our excavation spots the different phases quite accurately, and gives us also a good idea on the stratigraphy. And I give you some ideas. You see here one of our excavation areas, the, so to say, northeastern part of our trenches, A, B, and C, where we concentrated fine stratigraphical excavations to recent years, really differentiating each layers to each layer, debris being set into the, or put into the, or filled into the different mining galleries. Also then to understand collapses in between. And some of these big collapses you may see here with these huge blocks of salt being collapsed in one of the trenches. And here nearby, one of the salt bodies have also been found. So we get a quite good stratigraphical idea on these occasions, on these circumstances of the casualties. You'll see some of the features not very easy to understand sometimes. First of all, because of the filling history of the mine, the refill of the mine. But like in many other salt mines, you have hard and collapsed rock salt parts that may be have to be differentiated in what is the original and what is collapsed normally. But you can a little bit see now how it went down, and possibly this small slide shows you how we dig into the deep layer by layer in one of our trenches down to the solid rock parts in order to understand the original situation here in trench A. Also in the other trenches, we had quite nice results on occupation layers, on stables from the Sasanian time being used to house donkeys in the mine, but also to the older Achaemenid layers. Here, one of our nice finds, a cloth from the Sasanian time had been found during the excavations. Possibly we will see later on. Here's here to see this very nice object that had been investigated by our colleague Gabriele Ruspopper. So you do see a really outstanding details, well preserved things. For instance, here a foreleg of a goat preserved fully with flesh and hair and a mummy part, so to say, of a goat. Also very interesting feature, as you get a lot of information in ADNA research on these kind of material. Of course, as I said, we have stables inside, and here you see Nicole Bönke, our archaeobotanist, in sampling one of these stable layers. A stable being underground, being for using donkeys. A lot of dung of donkeys is there, so you have a lot of information on husbandry systems also. However, what we know now, especially in trench D, B, and C, is well preserved on these rock face that you see. The upper part is from the Sasanian. You see very typical regular pick traces from the Sasanian winning exploitation. In the lower parts, it goes to the Achaemenid period, which is then also, it can be differentiated by the hewing marks, so to say, on the rock face, and gives us also an idea how the mining exploitation technique has changed between the two main phases in this mine, between the Achaemenid and also the Sassanid period. And you see here again the rock phase in a 3D SFM model, and what you see in the lower part is more irregular slab winning, so to say, and in the upper part, let's say, more regular pick mining by regular pick traces. Most of the time, presumably produce small pieces of rock salt. So it's quite different what you see between these two phases. And to give you an imagination, this wall is about 9 meters in height. So you get also an idea on the massiveness of these mining structures we are excavating. You see it here again, the lower part, the Achaemenid, the upper part, the Sasanian mining, basically. And you see also from both of the periods typical mining tools, wedges and hammers, also for the Achaemenid period, and pickaxes and adzes, especially for the Sassanid period. Of course, one of our students, Katja Kuczynski, did some detailed study on our tools, and we get a good idea, especially on the Sasanian picks that been used, especially how often they changed or had to change their picks, and how often handles had to be repaired and how they had repaired it. So this gives us an interesting insight in something which is very typical for salt mining, to get access to the practices of daily life and work. And you see now really a whole series of things that you can use for reconstruct this daily practice in a row. And this gives us really interesting insight in the organization of labor force within this mine. However, what we learned then from a big profile, which we started in the Trench Northern profile here in that area, first by bulldozing work, later on by stabilizing and cleaning the profile, is that this mine not only had been worked in Achaemenid and Sasanian period, but reworked then also in younger periods. We did first, of course, all sort of geoelectric tomography to understand the extension of the underground. So by help of colleagues from Cottbus University, this tomography, especially in salt, is very useful because it can really differentiate between the embedding and the rock salt, of course. Because of the electric resistivity, but I do not want to go to the details now, but you see one of these tomographies being now on a profile, and shows us also here the rock salt and the embedding of filled in material holes like this or that, where we see underground galleries also. What we did then is, of course, hand excavation at the end. And you see it was a really demandful work, which we did over 3 campaigns to get insight in one of these huge profiles here. And by the end, we understood that there is an embedding Achaemenid layer and overlying different historical layers. What we see here in these different colors are especially Qajar, so means 19th century, Safavid means 16th and 17th century, down to Seljuk period, which is the blue one. So it's more the medieval and early modern time and modern time mining, which worked the Achaemenid and Sasanian mining. But we were lucky, as we found in the surrounding also Achaemenid deep mining area that is interconnected with our northeastern part of the mine, or northwestern part of the mine. So shows us there is deep underground tunneling to open deep parts of the deposit during the Achaemenid period. This was very exciting in a way. But as I said, salt always was important, and so we found all sorts of chronologies in the Letter Duslach. For instance, also Seljuk mining, which is, as I say, one of the main mining periods is Seljuk period, which is 12th and beginning of 13th century AD. And yeah, here again by bulldozing, opening galleries, and then we found one underground galleries with an entrance part where we had again stables, a nice organic material here, such a water bottle as leather, and other things clearly related chronologically to the Seljuk period, which is in fact one of the imperial periods of ancient Persia, and therefore it's not quite amazing also to find directional mining in that period. So as it had to be organized also to use the salt for different purposes. Yeah, some of the finds that we found in the underground of the Seljuk mine area. However, the question, of course, earlier evolved for us, where do we have camps nearby the mine? How was it really organized? And as we have learned, we have only you see here one of the 3-dimensional models. This is the Jerabad Valley, so to say, where the the small river stream is running. Of course, it has a lot of sedimentation. Here again, we do have the Duslach, and of course the mine, which is only a part of the whole mining sequence. Of course, we only at one side of the Duslach we could excavate. So this is certainly not all of the mining evidence that we have to think about. But we were lucky on the foot and the Piedmont area in a light indented part of the topography. We found other examples of occupational layers which are now related obviously with the mine. And you see here some of these excavation we did here in this, so to say, small indented topography, which of course a little bit safeguarded from the weather gear. It's a good area to use it for. And nearby our lower connex, where we worked with our find documentation, we could excavate here and of course find some pit houses, some pits, one latrine, and other things that are certainly related to camps. What we could evidence is here the Safavid and also the Seljuk area. So it's, but by the stray finds of Achaemenid pottery and Sasanian pottery, we also are sure that this area been used also during the older periods as a site to assemble, to start with the daily work, to stay for some time here, to collect things that had been used for the mines themselves. However, you see some of these results. Only small trenches could be opened, as I said, pit houses, larger and smaller ones, some fireplaces. So it shows a potential. Unfortunately, also this area is bulldozed, so it is destroyed. So we cannot find everything in a good stratigraphical situation. But to conclude a bit, what do we know now about the different mining phases of the area? And what you see here is the dating sequence of the Cherabat mine. And what you learn is that we have several areas, several phases, several periods of mining, starting with the Achaemenid period. From the wiggle matching and also the Bayesian modeling, which I show possibly later, we know it's a very short time mining. It's possibly only some decades, end of the 5th to the beginning of the 4th century BC, where this mine took place. Some of the older dates relate to more ancient material being used in the mine, but not a short-lived material. So we really are sure that it's quite a small operation period in the Achaemenid time. To make clear, these red lines show us the dating of the, so to say, of the human bodies found there. And it seems, if you look on the younger periods, that there is a break between the next phase. This is a dating of a mouse nest found in an open gallery. So it's certainly not occupation. So it starts then several hundred years later in the earlier Sasanian period. And what is interesting here, the operation period, it's quite longer. So we have several hundred years now. And we do have also several casualties, so several catastrophes, again, the red bars, that are somehow related with this operation phase. So this is a big difference, as it shows us, okay, there was a catastrophe at the end of the Achaemenid, but there is several during the Sasanian period. So it shows the resistivity of the mine in the Sasanian period was much higher than those of the Achaemenid period. Of course, here the younger dates, Seljuk period, and then what I said before, the younger Safavid and the Qajar periods, showing that at the end we do document a mining history that goes over 2,500 years. So this is something very outstanding in a way, I would say, from the historical archaeology perspective to the prehistoric or the Achaemenid period of managing this salt resource. So a very interesting a matter of fact, so to say. You see these main phases I have talked about. So coming back to the catastrophes, and of course, this is what most of the time the people ask for and what everybody's interested in. What we know from Bayesian modeling of mummies and their directly related finds, and these you see the IMS dating of this material. We can Bayesian modeling the things of mummy 3, 4, and 5, and you do see they all belong to a very short period of time. And arguing that, you would say, okay, it's somehow between 405 and 380 BCE where we have to think about catastrophe. So it's, of course, as we have no dendrodates, no exact dating, but this is quite narrow. So it shows all in these 2 decades, one has to think about this event that at the end led to the death of a group of miners. Of course, we have three bodies, one of which salt mine 3 was found uncontrolled somewhere here in 2005 or 2004, and then later on beneath a salt block, mummy number 4, and then you see here on a certain salt step, also beneath a salt block, a miner number 5. And this is now a clear situation, obviously, and you see the blocks here broken down, shows us the collapse of a mining gallery. Gero Steffens, one of our surveyors, is here on top of these mining of these heavy salt pieces that were fallen into the mining gallery and smashed, obviously, these miners. And we can tell a bit more about the mining hole. What we now know is a salt gallery, a hole, so to say, a mining cavity of this size that had been obviously collapsed quite rapidly. So in an event situation that did not allow even to escape, for some to escape this situation. And of course, this is plain for those, but interesting for us to understand. To understand a bit more about these mining groups themselves. Here again, the miners, especially 3, 4, and 5, are interesting for the Achaemenid, and these are those from the younger periods, from the Sasanian Empire, what I talked before, these various mining events that we can face for this period. Let us concentrate a bit on the Achaemenid group here. And what we do, of course, ask is, where do they come from? What origin? Are they traveling groups? What kind of social status do they have? What kind of archaeological arguments could we bring by to argue for a social status? Yeah, we know from the juvenile number 4, he has reddish, very cut hair. So he had an earring of silver, 2 earrings of silver. They had toilet instruments. So it seems that they are not so poor and not slaves in a strict sense. Supposed to be workmen in a way, somehow being related. They're also very well equipped with trousers, and Karina, of course, can tell you more about. And of course, the implements, knives, and many more things, small vessels that they need for curing their hands, and many things more. That shows that they're well equipped and well fed miners also. So is this really to think about slaves? I do rather think no. We're coming to the argument later on. What, again, for the equipment of number 4, it's the well-preserved one that Abul Faz found in the autumn of 2004. A leather fur as a kind of covering cloth. Then we do have these woolen, so to say, woolen clothes, tunica-shaped, and trousers, leather shoes, and many things, a knife, and many things more. 2 vessels with a past, somehow creamy past, possibly to use for your hands. This had been investigated recently, oily substance being used there, and many things more that show us a functional costume that been used as mining equipment. And one could think that these people had been equipped when they're going to the mine by a central authority or a central institution at the mine. Some arguments for the health and age status by radiology of Frank Rulli, Swiss, from the Zurich ETH, Zurich University, brought out a lot of details together with Lena Öström, who worked on the features and showed us that the mine had really suffered a trauma. His head had been smashed, his lung had been, his thorax had been bursten by the sudden event, by the heavy block fallen on him. So it was a sudden death, obviously, that he had suffered. And yeah, we do see some special things on his epigenetics, but this is nothing which is important now for his lifestyle. Even here you see some of the traumas, the bursting of the thorax. You see the bursting of the trauma on the skull, and you do also see the radiological findings. What is really and what was really from the beginning, and Mark Pollard said to me first when we visited in Djeraba, look at the fingers and the fingernails. They are so nicely cut that we thought, okay, is this really a hand of a workman? So we thought, okay, it could be someone who came in quite recently before he died. And this is also true for his age. He's quite young, somehow between 15 and 17 years. This shows the dental status, the status of his third molar, the open epiphysis, and so on. So it made us thinking, what is really the boy coming in? And of course, he was could not have been a very experienced miner, also according to his nicely preserved hand. So one would really, we thought about this a lot, and we came later on to an idea on that. Again, the epigenetical things on his spine, but as I said, this is nothing of much importance for his lifetime. Another interesting observation was then with Saltman 5. He's an older person. His radiology shows again multiple fractures, again by rockfall, caused by rockfall. It's not so well preserved than number 4, but of course it gives us also some information on his origin. We will see later, also on his health status. Could also isolate some intestinal things. Also, of course, the tissue, some of the tissue had been investigated. So we get a good idea also on him, although he is not that well preserved. And then, of course, the question came out, what we do now with the origin. And already Pollard and Wahdati Nassab, Irene Good, did some work on the isotopic investigation, which we accomplished and which we added later on by further stable isotopes research on nitrogen and carbon isotopes. And it turned out quite clearly that most of the miners from the Achaemenid gang have been in different origin during their youth time. Most clearly is it for number 4, because his isotope pattern still is quite foreign, but also for the others, means number 4 and 5, looking on the dental remains and looking also especially on the dental remains in comparison to the hairs, which are quite short-lived. Of course, we see the isotopic difference between the youth and the time when they died. So this shows us possibly all 3, 4, and 5 were coming from different origin to the salt mine. And this is now something very outstanding. So we thought about what would be the reason. And as I said, it's mixed. It's also mixed food consumption according to the stable isotope, and or foreign origin according to that. So they came from an area where they had more marine food. They came from an area which was not like the food that they had here in the Central Plateau. Certainly not from the Central Plateau. There are also other indications. This comes by Masoud Nizamabadi. He is parasitologist. He works on the parasitology of the human feces. And one of these parasites, being one of the helminths from the body of one of the miners, number 5, was Oxyuris equi. And horse pin, the others are typical ones: Ascaris, Trichuris, Taenia. Consumption of pig meat is nothing which is so surprising. But what was surprising was the Oxyuris equi, and the horse pinworm is also an intestinal parasite that is very common in the Central Plateau. And what Nizam Abadi suggests, also coming from Central Asia, very good evidence we do have from Scythian graves, especially from the Altai. So this gives us a direction also of these miners. So possibly they come from the Caspi, from Turkmenistan, from areas where they were involved also in different food practices, and also different, had infestation with different parasites. So this is a good indication. Of course, what we can say generally, they had good health status in general. They had fatty creams to protect them. They had nicely made clothes. His nails were not damaged. So the miner number 4, Guess, came in quite recently to the mine and then suddenly died, possibly during his first activities in the mine. Was he a paid worker or a slave? If you look at especially Sasanian literature, Sasanian contemporary evidence, written sources, we do have the expression of the Bandaka. The word came from the Achaemenid language, and it seems Bandaka is a working trip. You have to go on the command of the king of the kings, or of the satraps, of someone of high status. It's like you go for military, or go also for mining possibly. And during these, within these Bandaka, there were of course different people. For instance, Puhus, not learned workmen. And possibly our number 4 was a not worked Puhu, who came within a Bandaka to the salt mine of Cherabad. But this is a hypothesis, of course. It's a good idea, but let us wait for further research. However, number 4 might have been then staying for longer, and number 3 as well. He was also an adult, possibly also those who worked together in the mine. Who knows? They were found quite near to each other. Let us talk about what could be the reason for this situation. And Mark Pollard once came along with the idea, if there were not an earthquake. And earthquakes, zalzali, are very typical for Iranian highlands, also for Zanjan province, where we are on the borderline of gratones and tectonic movements. So, and it's interesting that Greek historian Duris of Samos wrote about earthquakes nearby Rage in Media, which is the modern Tehran. It's a site nearby Tehran, in fact, and it reports about earthquake around 350 somehow. To a large extent, numerous cities and villages were destroyed, and the rivers underwent changes of various kinds. So, guess makes you wonder, possibly not that earthquake, but one of these earthquakes that might have moved the rocks of the mine. Even thinking about that, these surface nearby mining was not as stable as it seems. Also, this is argument that we could bring. However, now we know about the Achaemenid Bandaka a bit, so we thought about, so what about the surrounding? Also, what about the Sasanian period, where we know more about stability of the miners, so the isotope the isotope relation of carbon or nitrogen is more regional, not all along, but they are more regional as it seems. So what about, is this a mining also in Achaemenid as a standalone? So Bandaka is coming with all the things bringing in, and they do, and then they leave, or is this something which is or was embedded to a hinterland, to a rural landscape? And of course, then we looked for, is there, what about living? Do we have supply systems, subsistence? What about agropastoral activities in the surrounding? What about further aspects of mobility and migration of specialists? So we did further research. First of all, we went to the on-site data, of course. Yeah, the on-site data, like the archaeology, the osteological remains, is not as numerous as we hoped. Our colleague Marjan Mashkour and Dr. Dawoodi did investigate them. And of course, which is interesting, found out that during the Sasanian period, donkeys and sheep are more common, while during the Achaemenid, we have donkeys, of course, we have sheep and goat, no donkeys, but we do have also pig, possibly portions of pig meat, and cattle coming were used. Cattle possibly also as provision for these horns. Then these horns have been used in Achaemenid period also, possibly for oily and fatty substances, transported them with these horns, according to our chemistry that we did on the internal things. So this gives an idea on a very special situation. Of course, also ruminants and other animals from the surrounding give us an idea on the ecology. And we do see, especially for the both periods, quite humid or not so bad living conditions in the surrounding, something like a river or a torrent-based situation with more vegetation, where some of these animals could have survived, not as dry as it is nowadays. So, of course, these animals are most interesting, and especially also the question of zoonosis between the animals in a mine during the operation, and several of the animals being used for transport, donkeys, for instance. And we have to thank a lot the group of Dr. Molavi from Tehran University, his candidate Senab Askari, Mrs. Bijani, Masoud Nizamabadi, they really did a great work on the analysis of feces, especially also on the animal feces, as we do see a lot of different animals being surrounded. And also on the soil samples, we did some investigation. So we do see a high infestation danger on these intestinal parasites on site from herbivores, especially from the Sasanian period. From donkeys, we do have a lot of sheep, but also from canines, rodents, mouse, rat, also birds that been analyzed. So showing us a real ecological picture also on that mine. Also interesting, giving a good idea, is what comes out from the archaeobotany. And Nicole Böhnke, who is doing really an intense study on the material now, and thousands of organic materials being found, wood, and of course all kind of wood chips and other things, of course, feathers and wooden branches, everything, plantal remains. You can see if we would not have this preservation, only what is red would have been survived. So it's about 90%, about 97% is organic material, of which most of it is plant material and other organic material, and shows us this enormous importance of salt preservation in general. But what Nicole found out, sorry, going back, that most of the Sasanian material, we come to it a bit later, comes from the surrounding. Not so clear for the Achaemenid period, where we might think also from further external origins. It's not so clear neither for the tools nor for the plants. Seems more things that came from farther away, while the, so to say, Sasanian material is more regional or even local ones. And of course, then we looked around, what would this mean? And so we started first surveys in the surrounding, getting ideas on settlement, getting ideas on also the valley fillings, to understand if there is the chance to find rural settlements in the surrounding. And of course, as I said at the beginning, it's quite hard because of many of the valley fillings are now covered by meters of sediment. So it is quite difficult to understand really about the rural situation in the surround to really find the farmsteads and so on. However, first of all, together with the Viennese geologist Erich Draganitz, Reza Koshrafta from Sanjan University, Sahan Saidi, we did a lot of work in the surrounding. What we found out is that there had been a lot of agriculture, at least since Islamic period, in the surrounding. And you can see, and one of the hypotheses, one of the hypotheses that Erich developed is that most of the sediments, because it was really enormous sedimentation rate, so we were really wondering now in these dry, high altitude central plateau areas, where do we have these enormous sedimentation rates? Although Sanjan winters are wet and cold, but it's really a lot. So, and what we found out is that most of the sediments obviously came in as sediments by flooding the field. And you might see here on these aerial pictures, these lines, and these seems irrigation that brought in swampy water to the fields for the pre-recent, would say, pre-recent and from the Islamic period, older Islamic period, agricultural system to the surroundings. So this gives one part of the answer for the situation why in the surrounding of Tuzla especially we do have a very intensive erosion activity and obviously also agricultural activities. But this did not answer quite clearly when did this agricultural system start. So we had to drill, and what came out clear is that to coming down to the Archaemenid period, we have to go down to 8-9 meters. But you can see if you look on the rare dating now on this profile, for instance, that especially in the younger period, from the medieval to the modern period, this is even more sedimentation than to the longer period from the Achaemenid to the medieval. But it shows similar fine sediments in the depth, which could indicate that, let's say, even at least from the Achaemenid Sasanian period, there was already flooding of the agricultural fields in the surrounding. This at least was a hint that we could have. Okay, therefore we thought, okay, what is about the whole landscape in the surrounding? Of course, it's not only the surrounding of the mine. What about the other areas, the side valleys, this Rezabad Valley, the Cherabad Valley, and also the Merabad Valley? These are three rivers, or small rivers, that produce the water catchment for the Tal Kherut, for the whole area, and where the mine already is in this confluence situation of these three valleys. So we started conventional surveys, as you always do. First, from beginning, our Iranian colleagues did a lot, Abul Faz and Iman and Hamed and others did from the years always find settlements, so we used them. And we do see that there we have some slight Neolithic, we do a bit have Bronze Age and Chalcolithic. Iron Age, early Iron Age we do not have. Younger Iron Age from the Achaemenid period onwards we do have. And we do have a lot of Parthian and Sasanian period, especially in two valleys. And if you go for the Islamic period, we have also them in the Merabad Valley. So this gave us at least an idea what has happened. And this led us to the idea, okay, let us look for the more intensive to the settlements. Are they supplying settlements, or are they independent rural settlements? So we did not know. And so we started with intensive survey, with small-scale excavation in recent years during a new project we're doing. So you see some of the sites we worked on recently. And I want to concentrate now on two, Kusachi and Sarintape, where we did also excavation and where we are still working on at the moment together with our Iranian colleagues. You can imagine at the moment, most of our field work is done by our Iranian colleagues under the direction of Abul Faz Ali, while we are being the remote ones, being in our laboratories and support them, because we are not at the moment able to travel to Iran. But whatever, we hope better times, and then we will see. However, let us go first to Kusachi, and as I said, later on to Sarintape. So Kusachi brought us a very small hillock, which you see here, very small, not big length, not big settlement, but very interesting features. Smithing site, here a smithy, a part of the smithy. It was only test trenches, but interesting from, let's say, the Achaemenid and post-Achaemenid period. Also a burial, occupation, 2 occupation layers we found there, of which the first phase belonged contemporary, where the smithy is also, contemporary to the Achaemenid mining in Cherabad. But interesting also, there is a younger phase, much younger than the Achaemenid mining. Interesting also, this phase is not as structured as the older phase, where we have metallurgical activity, where we have external pottery from abroad. Here we do have a normal rural landscape settlement, a rural settlement with a not so nice architecture. So it could be that there is a following of our rural development on that side after the mining ceased in Duslach. This could be an interesting point, how maybe the mining led to a settlement, but later on, after the mining had ceased by the catastrophe, it had been continued as a rural settlement. So this is one of the possible answers we do have for Kusachi at the moment. Different the situation in Sarintape. Sarin is not an Achaemenid settlement, it's a Sasanian settlement, also quite small, not very large. You can see here to the agricultural hinterland from Sarintape to the upper part of the Cherabad River. Nowadays we do have the settlement of Cherabad and of course gardening system and agriculture. So possibly a similar situation we had in the Sasanian period. The site also been surveyed. We found here, especially on the top of the hillock and here on one of the flanks, a lot of anomalies. We started to excavate them now recently. And again, storage. Now we have storaging, big pits for storaging, also bakery ovens, also architecture, several facets, not single phase settlement. Seems also different periods of Sasanian period. So it's could be, however, from the ceramics, what we see now, contemporary to our Sasanian period mining in Duslach, from the earlier to the later period. So this makes it interesting. Also some seal impression show that there is administrational activity on the site and possibly either kiln or metallurgical activity. There was an oven found, a furnace found on the Piedmont of the settlement that showed there is slag, but I do not dare to interpret this oven now, as we have not studied carefully it. But it shows this site, the cluster around Sarintape is somehow related again with our Cherabad mine. So to bring it together, we do see, obviously, the mine of Duslach started, it seems to be, with first rural activities, possibly also by first drainaging systems, especially in the surrounding also of the Duslach. This is not quite clear yet, but what we know is that the sidewell is being settled at the time when the mine at the Duslach starts, and this is a good indication how this may have been related to each other. So in a landscape you normally would not go in so easily, the mining possibly induced rural activities, which stayed then later on. Then also in the Sasanian period being intensified with more settlements now in 2 sidewellies, and even more intensified then from the Seljuk period onwards to the younger Islamic period, where we have these long-lasting salt management at the Duslach. So what we learn from that is that an integrated research to the hinterland gives us a lot of answers for the on-site data of Duslach itself. And I would say this is, I do not know really, but one of the very rare samples in Iranian economy history where we can, in archaeology, where we can learn about these rural interdependencies. And this makes the saltmen, unfortunately died in several occasions, so worthy, and of course the study of their whole world also very worthy to us. And I hope I have not overexpanded my time. Thanks, and yeah, I'm open for questions, no doubt.